John Miller is the NYPD's Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism now, but in 1998, he was a reporter for ABC News, and he did an interview that would presage a generation of terror.
Bin Laden comes across the field, and we step like 3 steps down into this hut that's kind of dug into the ground. Inside it looks like a cave because the walls are uneven.
Miller interviewed al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in Pakistan 3 years before the World Trade Center bombings. Not many outside the counterterrorism world even knew who bin Laden was back then, but he was suspected in the U.S. embassy attacks in Tanzania and soon the attacks on the USS Cole in Yemen. Miller spent 10 days traveling with al-Qaeda operatives in Pakistan and Afghanistan before one night bin Laden finally showed up.
He sat down on this kind of bench covered in red fabric and put a blanket kind of over his knee. It was like sitting at story time with an old uncle.
But there was a problem, a big problem. Bin Laden's handlers wouldn't allow anyone to translate the Sheikh's answers. Miller didn't know what bin Laden was saying. And the al-Qaeda leader's monotonal, measured delivery was deceivingly calm. Miller had no way of knowing just how fiery it was.
And at the end, I went back to the Arabic-speaking Iraqi fixer who had come with us on the trip. And I said, did he answer any of the questions? And he said, we need to get the tapes, and we need to get out. He declared war on America.
And he vowed 3 years before 9/11 that he would kill American civilians.
We do not differentiate between those dressed in military uniforms and civilians. They are all targets. We predict a black day for America and the end of the United States. They will retreat from our land and collect the bodies of their sons back to America, if Allah wills.
He said things that were a preview to history that had not yet occurred.
And he said all these things with some confidence. An early version of the 9/11 plot was already in the planning stages when Miller interviewed bin Laden. He didn't tell Miller about that, but he did promise attacks against America.
On May 28th, 1998, that sounded like a lot of tall talk from a guy in a cave with a couple thousand people. On September 12th, 2001, it made a lot more sense.
On December 4th, 1998, an item in President Clinton's Presidential Daily Briefing, a PDB, is entitled Bin Laden Preparing to Hijack U.S. Aircraft and Other Attacks. The PDB says bin Laden and his allies are preparing for attacks in the United States, including an aircraft hijacking to obtain the release of Sheikh Omar Abdel-Rahman, Ramzi Youssef, and Mohammed Sadiq Awda. One source quoted a senior member of the Gamma Islamiyah, an Egyptian Islamic sect, saying that as of late October, the IG had completed planning for an operation in the United States on behalf of bin Laden, but that the operation was on hold. A senior bin Laden operative from Saudi Arabia was to visit the IG, the Gamma Islamiyah, counterparts in the U.S. soon thereafter to discuss options, perhaps including an aircraft hijacking. The same source says bin Laden may implement plans to hijack U.S. aircraft before the start of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan on December 20th, and that 2 members of the operational team had evaded security checks in a recent trial run at a New York airport. A possible different source said that in late September of '98, Mohammed Shawki Islambuli, brother of the assassin of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, Khalid Islambuli, and described in the PDB as a Gamma Islamiyah leader, was planning to hijack a U.S. airliner during the next couple of weeks to free Abdul Rahman and other prisoners held in the United States. The PDB also says that some members of the bin Laden network have received hijack training. According to various sources, but no group directly tied to bin Laden's al-Qaeda organization has ever carried out an aircraft hijacking. Bin Laden could be weighing other types of operations against U.S. aircraft. The PDB mentions other bin Laden-related threats, including recent reports that the Gamma Islamiyah has obtained surface-to-air missiles and intends to move them from Yemen to Saudi Arabia to shoot Saudi Arabian aircraft and U.S. aircraft. The private intelligence group Stratfor will later say that in addition to his ties with Gamma Islamiyah, Islambouli worked with bin Laden in the Maktab al-Khidmat charity front in Pakistan and is believed to have lived in Afghanistan in the 1990s as part of the group of key Egyptian advisors surrounding bin Laden, such as Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri and Saeed Imam al-Sharif, also known as Dr. Fadl. Early in 1998, the CIA ignored information from a recently retired CIA agent that claimed 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in a terrorist cell with Islambouli, and both were experts on plane hijackings and were planning to hijack planes. Perhaps not coincidentally, on the same day, CIA Director George Tenet issues a declaration of war against al-Qaeda in a memo to the U.S. intelligence community. Also on this day, counterterrorism czar for the White House, Richard Clarke, holds a meeting of his interagency counterterrorism and security group, also known as the CSG, to discuss the threat. The group agrees that New York City airports should go on a maximum security alert that weekend, and security should be boosted at other East Coast airports. The FBI, FAA, and New York City Police Department get versions of the PDB report. Later in December and again in January of 1999, the source says the hijacking has been postponed because 2 operatives have been arrested in Washington or New York. But the FBI is unable to find any information to support the threat, nor is it able to verify any arrests similar to what the source described, and the source remains mysterious. The high alert in New York airports is canceled by the end of January of 1999. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice would later testify to the 9/11 Commission that in the first 8 months of Bush's presidency before 9/11, the president receives at these presidential daily briefings more than 40 briefing items on al-Qaeda, and 13 of those are in response to questions he or his top advisors posed. The content of the warnings in these briefings are unknown. However, CIA Director George Tenet claims that none of the warnings specifically indicates terrorist plans to fly hijacked commercial aircraft into buildings in the U.S. Richard Clarke will later emphasize Tenet on 40 occasions in morning meetings mentioned al-Qaeda to the president. 40 times, many of them in very alarmed ways about a pending attack. These briefings are normally given in person by CIA Director Tenet and are usually attended by Vice President Dick Cheney and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice. In the Clinton administration, up to 25 officials received the PDB, but in the Bush administration before 9/11, this was sharply reduced to only 6 people. Other top officials have to make do with a senior executive intelligence brief generally released 1 day later, which is similar to the PDB, but often contains less information. Also, without the knowledge of the FBI or the State Department, the NSA, as well as the CIA, have been running covert signal and human intelligence operations involving satellite phones of Osama bin Laden between the years 1992 to 1998, and a house in Yemen which would later be known as an Al-Qaeda switchboard, where all electronic communications by phone were going through between the years 1996 to 2001. Also, the CIA had been intentionally withholding pertinent information from FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. about Al-Qaeda operatives Khalid al-Mihdhar and Awaf al-Hazmi, who had traveled from the house in Yemen that the CIA and NSA had been monitoring to a terrorist summit meeting in January of 2000 and to the United States, as both had dual U.S. visas. Both men were implied to have been involved with the 1998 East Africa bombings and the USS Cole bombings, as well as being involved with the Chechen war under Ibn Khattab, an Al-Qaeda Islamic leader fighting against the Soviets in the Balkans. All of this information was intentionally withheld from not just FBI officials, but also from State Department officials. On May 16th of 2001, an anonymous person calls the U.S. Embassy in the United Arab Emirates and warns that bin Laden's supporters have been in the United States and are planning an attack in the United States using high explosives. The caller mentions that operatives are infiltrating the U.S. from Canada, but there was no mention of when or where the attack might occur. The next day, based on this warning, the first item on the agenda for counterterrorism, Richard Clark, Interagency CSG Group, is entitled Osama bin Laden Operation Planned in U.S. The anonymous caller's tip cannot be later corroborated, but in July of 2001, the CIA will share the warning with the FBI, the INS, U.S. Customs Service, and the State Department. It will also be mentioned in the August 6, 2001 presidential daily briefing given to Bush, and that Bush will be told that the CIA and FBI are investigating it. But eventually, neither the CIA nor the FBI is able to corroborate the information in the call. On May 30th of 2001, Ahmed Rassam is convicted in the spring of 2001 for attempting to bomb the Los Angeles International Airport in the Millennium bombing plot of January of 2000. Facing the likelihood of life in prison, he starts cooperating with authorities in an attempt to reduce his sentence. On this day, he details his experiences in an Al-Qaeda training camps and his many dealings with top Al-Qaeda deputy Abu Zubaydah. According to FBI notes from Rassam's interrogation, Zubaydah asked Rassam to send him original Canadian passports to help Zubaydah get people inside of America. Zubaydah wanted an operation in the U.S. and talked about the need to get explosives into the United States for this operation. But Rassam makes it clear that this was a separate plot from the one he was involved with. Notes from this day further explain that Rassam doesn't know if any explosives made it into the United States because once an operation was initiated, operators were not supposed to talk about it to anyone. There is no concrete evidence that Rassam knew any of the 9/11 attack details. On August 4th, the CIA officers who draft the presidential daily brief item given to George Bush on August 6th ask an FBI agent for additional information and also to review a draft of the memo, but she does not provide all the additional information she could. The 9/11 Commission will refer to the FBI agent as Jen M. She is presumably Jennifer Maitner, an agent with the Osama bin Laden unit at FBI headquarters. The purpose of the memo is to communicate to the president the intelligence community's view that the threat of attacks by bin Laden is both current and serious. But Maitner fails to add some important information that she has. Around the end of July, she was informed of the Phoenix memo, which suggests that an inordinate number of bin Laden-related Arabs are taking flying lessons in the United States, or presumably in Arizona, near Scottsdale. She does not link this to the portion of the memo discussing aircraft hijackings. Responsibility for dealing with the Phoenix memo is formally transferred to her on August 7th. The Phoenix memo was penned by FBI agent out of Phoenix, Ken Williams. The finished PDB item discusses the possibility bin Laden operatives may hijack an airliner. It says that there are patterns of suspicious activity in this country consistent with preparations for hijackings. It is unclear whether the draft PDB item Maitner reviews contains this information. However, if it does, it apparently does not inspire her to take any significant action on the memo before 9/11, such as containing the agents in Phoenix who notify them of their preparations for airline hijackings. On August 6, 2001, President George W. Bush receives a classified presidential daily briefing at his Crawford, Texas ranch, indicating that bin Laden might be planning to hijack commercial airliners. The PDB provided to him is entitled Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. The entire briefing focuses on the possibility of terrorist attacks inside the United States. In 2004, Bush will state that he requested a briefing on a topic after threats relating to a conference in Genoa, Italy, in July of 2001, where Western intelligence agencies believed bin Laden was planning to plot to crash an airplane into a building to kill Bush and other leaders. Two CIA analysts prepared the briefing. They will later explain that they saw it as an opportunity to convey that the threat of an al-Qaeda attack in the U.S. was both current and serious. The existence of this briefing is kept secret until it is leaked in May of 2002, causing a storm of controversy, while National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice claims the memo is only 1.5 pages long, while other accounts state it is 11.5 pages instead of the usual 2 or 3. A page and a half of the contents will be released on April 10th of 2004. This reportedly is the full context of the briefing. The briefing, as released, states as follows: clandestine foreign government and media reports indicate bin Laden, since 1997, has wanted to conduct terrorist attacks inside the United States. Bin Laden implied on U.S. television interviews in 1997 and 1998 that his followers would follow the example of World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef and bring the fighting to America. After U.S. missile strikes on the base in Afghanistan in 1998, bin Laden told followers he wanted to retaliate in Washington, according to a redacted service. An Egyptian Islamic Jihad operative told redacted service at the same time that bin Laden was planning to exploit the operative's access to the United States to mount a terrorist strike. The Millennium plotting in Canada in 1999 may have been part of bin Laden's first serious attempt to implement a terrorist strike inside the United States. Convicted plotter Ahmed Wassam has told the FBI that he conceived the idea to attack Los Angeles International Airport himself, but that bin Laden Lieutenant Abu Zubaydah encouraged him and helped facilitate this operation. Wassam also said that in 1998, Abu Zubaydah was planning his own U.S. attack. Although bin Laden has not succeeded, his attacks against the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 demonstrate that he prepares operations years in advance and is not deterred by setbacks. A clandestine source said in 1998 that a bin Laden cell in New York was recruiting Muslim American youth for attacks. Nevertheless, FBI information since that time indicates patterns of suspicious activity in the country consistent with preparations for airline hijackings or other types of attacks that goes back to the mid-1990s. After the briefing was over, supposedly a U.S. CIA briefer presents Bush with a follow-up to the PDB. Bush would read the PDB and tell the briefer, You've covered your ass now. This account is according to journalist Ron Suskind, whose 2006 book, The 1% Doctrine. And at an eyeball-to-eyeball intelligence briefing during this urgent summer, George W. Bush seemed to have made the wrong choice. He looked hard at the panicked CIA briefer and said, all right, you covered your ass now. The Bush administration would hold a no high-level meeting prior to 9/11 to discuss the PDB given to him on August 6th. Richard Clark would later suggest that 9/11 might have been stopped if Condoleezza Rice and the president had acted personally and gotten involved while shaking the trees, gotten the cabinet members involved when they had ample warning in June and July and August that something was about to happen. Condoleezza Rice said that the president received 40 warnings face-to-face from the director of Central Intelligence. She admitted that she didn't convene the cabinet. And as some of the 9/11 commissioners pointed out, this was in marked contrast to the way the government operated in December of '99, when it had similar information and it successfully thwarted attacks. The warnings were there. The intelligence, much of it, was shared, but it was vague. The pertinent intelligence, the specific intelligence, the intelligence that most likely could have stopped the September 11th attacks that were known to the CIA and probably the NSA, and who knows whether the Saudis and Israelis intelligence operatives that were monitoring and assisting the 9/11 hijackers inside the United States, that too wasn't shared with any of the FBI or the State Department. 9/11 could have been prevented. Instead, the intelligence services hoarded the information. The question is, why?